Hello and welcome to our new YouTube tutorial. In this video we're going to be building a complete responsive website template based on HTML, CSS and JavaScript. We have already released a couple of YouTube videos where we build the complete websites, so you can check them out. The links will be in the description. The project is going to be the template of something like an architecture and design website. As I said, the project is going to be built based on three core technologies: HTML, CSS and a little bit of JavaScript, so I expect that you already know some basic stuff about them. Besides that, you will be able to use CSS grid, CSS transitions, animations, and also one of the JavaScript plugins called Tilt.js. So the project is full of interesting things and hopefully you will enjoy it. Alright, before we start to build the project, at first let's go ahead and describe it. If I reload the page, then we will get here the spinner. It is displaying during a couple of seconds, and after that the project is loaded. The first thing that you see here is a landing with an animated banner and the menu icon. So once the project is displayed, the banner moves from the bottom with a nice and smooth transition. Besides that, we have here an animated full screen background. The scale of the image is decreasing with a transition. Alright, so as I said, we have here the menu icon, which is placed at the top right corner. If I click it, then the sidebar will display from the right side. Also, the menu icon will transform into an X. The navigation is going to be kind of simple one, but we have here a nice and cool effect. If I hover over the navigation items, then they will change their color from left to right. Besides that, we have here a couple of social media icons at the bottom of the sidebar with some hover effect. If I hover over the X closing button, then the tooltip will display with the text close, and if I click the X, then the sidebar will close. Okay, and that's it about the landing and sidebar. Let's move on to the next section, which is going to be about us. We have here the heading with an underline followed by some text and icons. And in the center of the section we have a small image of the house. This section is going to be built based on CSS grid. Next comes the card section. We have here three cards with a nice and cool hover effect. It should be created with one of the JavaScript plugins called Tilt.js, so you'll be able to learn about how to use this plugin. After the card section, we will build the contact section. As you can see, we have here the background image on the left side of this box. As for the right side, there are a couple of elements. I mean the heading, several inputs, and the submit button. Each of the input fields has its label, and if I focus the input, then the label will move up with some transition. This effect is really popular and commonly used today, so you'll be able to learn how to create it. Alright, after the contact section, we will build this simple footer where we have the copyright text and some social media icons. So the one last thing that I want to mention here is this fixed yellow button with the up arrow key. If I click it, then the page will scroll up smoothly to the top. Alright, so the project is going to be responsive to all different screen sizes. If I inspect the page, then switch to the responsive mode and check the project on different screen sizes, you will find that it's responsive. I want to mention here one thing. The project is built based on the desktop first approach, and we built it on larger screen size. I mean the screen size with 1920 pixels of width and 1080 pixels of height. So if you're using a relatively smaller screen size, then the project might not look good during the tutorial, but don't worry, at the end of the day we will make it responsive. In the meantime, you can use the responsive mode and set the width to 1920 pixels and the height to 1080 pixels and work like so. Alright, so I think we are ready to go. Let's get started. I have created a new folder on the desktop called Architect Website, in which I have another folder for the images. Let's go ahead and open the folder in VS Code. I'm going to create three different files for HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Let's call them index.html, then style.css and script.js. Next, I'm going to insert the basic HTML document in the index.html file. For that, let's use Animate. We have to place here an exclamation mark and then hit Enter or Tab. So here we go. Alright, so once the basic HTML document is ready, it's time to run the project to the browser. In order to do that, I'm going to use one of the VS Code packages called Live Server. This package allows us to run the project to the browser live and make changes or updates without reloading the page each time. So I recommend installing and use this package. Okay, so the project is up and running. We have to set up a couple of more things. First of all, let's link these three files. I'm going to open link tag. Then in the href attribute, I'm going to specify the path of the CSS file. As for the JavaScript, let's open a script tag right above the closing body tag, and in the source attribute specify the path of the script file. Besides that, let's change the title. I'm going to insert here architect website. Alright, so all three files are connected, and next I'm going to bring in a couple of links. Throughout the project I'm going to use some font awesome icons and also a couple of Google fonts. Let's at first take care of the font awesome link. I'm going to search for font awesome CDN.js. Let's go to this link, select CSS and grab the link. I'm going to open a link tag here and paste the link as the value of the href attribute. Alright, after that I'm going to search for Google Fonts. So this is the Google Fonts website. Overall I'm going to use three different fonts. Let's search for Baloo DA2 and select some of these different styles. Next we need Josephine Slab. I'm going to select a couple of styles here as well. And finally search for Muli. Then I'm going to grab the link and paste it in the head element. Alright, so I think we're good to go. I'm going to build the project section by section. At first we'll prepare the HTML markups and then write some CSS. Let's take a look at the finished project. So the first part of our project that is going to be built is a header. It has the banner with a heading, paragraph and button. Once we reload the page and the spinner finishes loading, then the banner will appear with a nice animation. Also we have here a full screen image that has some animation effect as well. Besides that, I'm going to create a menu icon. Technically it's not the part of the header, it has a fixed position, but anyway I'm going to create it. Alright, enough to talk, let's get started. I'm going to open a div tag, which is going to be the container. Next let's open HTML5 header tag with the class header. So the header will consist of two main parts. The first one is going to be the image. As for the second part, it should be the banner. I'm going to open div tag with the class img wrapper. It's going to be the wrapper of the image. And then inside the div element, let's open image tag. In the source attribute, I'm going to specify the path of the image. We need bg.jpg from the images folder. Okay, next we will have a banner. So let's open div tag with class banner. It will consist of three different elements. The first one is going to be h1 heading element with the text architecture and interior design. Next we will have paragraph with some dummy text, and also button with the text discover now. Okay, so here we have the header with its elements. Next I'm going to create the markup for the menu icon. So let's open div tag with the class Hamburger Menu. So the lines of the icon will be represented with div elements. Let's open div tag with the class line, which is going to be the common class name, but besides that we need here line 1 for some individual styling. Then duplicate this line of code twice and change the class names. We need line 2 and line 3. Alright, so that's it about the HTML markup for the header. Now it's time to start to write some CSS. First of all, I'm going to insert here some reset and common styles. Let's get rid of the default margin and padding for all the elements. In order to select every element, we need to use asterisk and then set margin and padding, both of them to 0. Besides that, I'm going to get rid of default outline from the elements. We need outline none. Also, let's set box sizing to border box. Next, I'm going to get rid of default styles for the list. We need list style none. And also, I'm going to get rid of default styles for the link elements. Let's pass here text decoration none. Alright, so as you can see, all the common and reset styles are applied. Throughout this project, I'm going to use rem as the measurement unit. Right now, 1 rem is equal to 16 pixels because by default, the font size of the HTML element equals 16 pixels. I want to convert 1 rem into 10 pixels because I think it would be more convenient and easy to calculate. So to do that, we have to decrease the font size of the HTML element. Let's make it 62.5%. So now 1 rem is equal to 10 pixels. You can see the sizes of the elements have decreased. Okay, let's go ahead and customize the header. Let's select it. First of all, I'm going to define its width and height. Let's set width to 100%. As for the height, I'm going to make it 100 viewport height. It means that we set the height of the header to 100% of the viewport. Next, I'm going to take care of the image. Let's select its wrapper and set width and height, both of them, to 100%. And besides that, I'm going to define background color to make the image look good. Let's use here RGBA value with black color and with opacity 0.8. Okay, finally I'm going to customize the image itself. So let's select it. Then set width and height, both of them, to 100%. Also, we need here object fit cover to maintain the quality of the image. And finally, I'm going to decrease the opacity. Let's make it 0.5. So, as you can see, the image looks good. We no longer have here the scroll bars, and now it's time to customize the banner. First of all, I'm going to change the position of the banner. Let's select it and set position to absolute. In order to define the position of the banner according to the header, which is its parent element, we have to set the position of the header to a relative. Then I'm going to make the top position of the banner 30%. As for the left position, let's make it 15%. So the banner is positioned, and now I'm going to customize its elements. Let's start with the heading. Let's select it. First of all, I'm going to define its font family. Let's use font called Bellu DA2 and the font group serif. Then I'm going to increase the font size. Let's make it 8 rem. Also, I'm going to make the font a little bit lighter using font weight 300, and then change the color, make it white. Okay, so the heading looks good. I'm going to decrease its width in order to break it on two different lines. Let's make its width 50%. Besides that, we have to decrease the line height because there is too big space between the lines. So let's make line height 9 rem. Okay, now it looks much better. Let's add here a couple of more styles. I'm going to create some space between letters using letter spacing 0.2 rem, and also create a little shadow effect using text shadow with the values 0, 0.3 rem, 0.5 rem, and the RGBA with black color and with opacity 0.4. Alright, that's it about the heading element. Let's move on to the paragraph. Let's select it. I'm going to set font family to Josephine Slab, serif, then increase font size, make it 4 rem, and change the color, make it white. Alright, next I'm going to decrease the width of the paragraph as well. Let's make it 70% and also create some space between the letters using letter spacing with the value 0.1 rem. After that, let's create some space at the bottom of the paragraph and also add to it some shadow. So we need margin bottom with the value 3 rem, and also text shadow with the value 0, 0.3 rem, 0.5 rem, and RGBA with black color and with opacity 0.4. Okay, that's it about the paragraph. Let's move on to the button. Let's select it, and first of all, I'm going to define its width and height. Let's set width to 25 rem. As for the height, I'm going to make it 7 rem. And also change background color. I'm going to use here color C29525. Okay, let's move on and add some other styles to the button. I'm going to get rid of the default border. Let's use border none. Also change the font family. In this case, I'm going to use font called Muli Serif. Then increase font size, make it 2 rem. Also transform text into uppercase. And change color, make it white. Alright, so step by step the button is getting much nicer. I'm going to add to it some shadow effects. Let's at first use text shadow with the values 0.2 rem, 0.4 rem, and the RGBA with the black color and with the opacity 0.2. Let's duplicate this line of code, change text shadow into box shadow. Also, instead of 0.2, we need 0.3, then 0.5, and the opacity 0.4. And finally, let's make the type of the cursor pointer. Okay, so that's it about the button. It's customized and I think it's pretty nice. Next, I'm going to style the menu icon, and after that we will take care of the animations. So let's go ahead and select Hamburger Menu and define its width and height. I'm going to set both of them to 3 rem and also use here some temporary background. Let's make it red. Okay, so we have to take care of the position of the icon. It's going to be placed at the top right corner of the page. So I'm going to set position of the icon to fixed, and then define top and right properties. I'm going to set both of them to 5 rem. Alright, so the icon is positioned, but as you can see, it's not quite visible. Let's fix that with the z-index property, and also I'm going to make the lines visible. So let's use here z-index with some higher value, let's say 200. Then select line. As you know, it is the common class name for all the lines. So first of all, let's define width and height. I'm going to set width to 100%. As for the height, let's make it 0.2 rem. Also change background color, use here white, and then use box shadow with values 0.1 rem, then 0.2 rem, and the RGBA with 3 zeros and opacity 0.2. Alright, so now the lines are visible, but they are placed on top of each other. We need some space between them, and I'm going to create it using Flexbox. So let's make the Hamburger Menu flex container. Then we need to change flex direction. Let's make it column. In order to create even space between the lines, let's use justify content with the value space evenly. Then change the type of the cursor, make it pointer, and also I'm going to get rid of the red background color. Alright, so with the menu icon we are done. It is customized and looks good. Now, as I said, I'm going to create some animations. I'm going to start with the full screen image animation. It's going to be kind of simple one. I will increase the scale of the image and then decrease it during the animation. So I'm going to create CSS keyframes. As the name of the animation, let's use scale. So overall we will have 2 steps, starting point and the ending point. We will increase the scale of the image to 1.3 and we will decrease it to 1 during the animation. So on 0% we need transform. With the scale function I'm going to insert here 1.3, and on the 100% we need again transform, scale with the value 1. So the animation is ready. We just need to apply it to the image. For that we have to use a couple of animation properties. I mean animation name and the animation duration. So as the name of the animation we need to use scale. As for the animation duration, let's make it 25 seconds. We used here 2 different properties, but actually we can use here just the animation property and avoid writing a couple of different properties. We have to specify here the name of the animation followed by the duration, 25 seconds. Okay, so as you can see, the animation is working. The scale of the image is decreasing, but we have here a tiny problem. Once the scale of the image is increased, we see here the scroll bars, and in order to fix that we have to use overflow hidden and we have to assign it to the image wrapper. Now as you can see, the problem is fixed. Alright, so the first animation works fine. Let's move on to the second one. I'm going to animate the banner. It should move from the bottom once the page is loaded. So I'm going to create another CSS keyframes. Let's call it move banner. So like the previous animation, we will have 2 steps. On a starting point, I'm going to move down the elements and also rotate them a little bit. Then during the animation they will appear from the bottom and rotate back. First of all, let's hide all three banner elements by default. Let's use opacity 0. Actually, the rotation effect is going to be a kind of 3D, so we need to create a 3D environment, and for that we have to use one of the CSS properties called perspective. I'm going to assign it to the header. Let's make it 100 rem. And then add some styles to the keyframes. So on 0% we need transform with translate y function. It will move the element according to the y-axis. Let's insert here 40 rem. And also we need rotate y. It will rotate element according to the y-axis as well. Let's pass here minus 20 degrees. On 100% we need to set both functions to 0. So we need transform, translate y 0 and rotate y 0 as well. And besides that, we have to make the elements visible using opacity 1. Okay, so the keyframes are ready. Now we need to define the animation property for each banner element. They should have the same name and duration, but a different delay time. So let's assign to all three elements animation property with the name move banner. The duration is going to be 1 second. And after that, I'm going to define different delay times. For the heading, we need 0.5 seconds. Then for the paragraph, I'm going to use 0.7 seconds. As for the button, let's make the delay time 0.9 seconds. Alright, so as you can see, the elements are hidden by default. If I reload the page, then they will appear from the bottom. Once the animation is finished, then the elements disappear again. Also, during the animation, we see the scroll bar. So we need to fix those issues. Once the animation is finished, the banner elements should keep the styles from the second step of the keyframes. I mean, translate and rotate functions with 0 values and opacity 1. In order to achieve that, we can add to those values one additional value called forwards. It belongs to the animation fill mode property. And also, to get rid of this scroll bar, we need overflow hidden. Alright, so now everything works perfectly, and with a header we are done. Let's move on and start to work on the next part of the project. I'm going to create the sidebar and also make the Hamburger Menu work. Let's take a look at the finished project. So once I click the menu icon, then the sidebar will display. It will move from right to left. We have here a couple of menu items. If I hover over them, then they will change their color nicely. Also, we have here several social media icons down at the bottom of the sidebar. If I hover over the X closing button, then a little tooltip will appear with the text close. And when I click the X, the sidebar will close. So that's it, what we're going to create in this part. First of all, let's create the HTML markup. I'm going to open section tag right after the header. Let's assign to it class sidebar. So the sidebar will consist of two different parts. We will have the navigation items and some social media icons. So let's open UL element with the class menu. Then we need li element with the class name menu item, followed by the link element, which should have class menu link. And as the first menu item, I'm going to insert here home. So overall we will have 5 different menu items. So let's duplicate li element 4 times and change the content. The second one is going to be about us. Then we will have team, pricing, and contact. So as you can see, here we have the links. Next, let's add a couple of social media icons to the sidebar. I'm going to open div element with the class social media. Then I'm going to pass here link element, which will include font or some icon. The first one is going to be Facebook. So we need here class FAB, FA, Facebook, F. Let's duplicate link element twice and change the class names. We need here FAB, FA, Instagram. And the third one is going to be FAB, FA, Twitter. Alright, so with the HTML markup we are done. Let's go ahead and start to customize the sidebar. I'm going to select it and define its width and height. Let's make its width 40 rem. As for the height, it's going to be 100 viewport height. Also, I'm going to define the position, which is going to be fixed. And then we need top and right properties, both of them equal to 0. Alright, so the sidebar is placed in the right way, and in order to see it better, let's change the background color. Let's use here white color. Okay, let's move on and start to customize the menu items. I'm going to select the menu itself and position it somewhere in the center of the sidebar. So let's define its position, make it absolute. Then set top property to 40%. Next we need left with the value 50%. And also, in order to center the element, let's use transform, translate, and pass here minus 50% twice. Okay, so the menu is positioned. Next, I'm going to customize the items. Let's go ahead and select the li element, which has class menu item, and assign to it text align center. After that, I'm going to select the links. First of all, let's define font family. In this case, I'm going to use font called Baloo DA2 serif. Then increase the font size, make it 4 rem. And also change the color, make it dark gray using 555. Okay, that's it about the menu items right now. Let's move on and take care of the social media icons. So I'm going to select div element, which is the wrapper of the icons. First of all, let's define position, make it absolute. As you know, social media icons should be placed at the bottom of the sidebar. So I'm going to define bottom property with the value 3 rem, and also make the width 100%. Okay, next I'm going to place the icons in the center. For that, let's use Flexbox. We need display flex and justify content center. Alright, let's move on and customize the icons. I'm going to select eye element. First of all, let's increase font size, make it 2.2 rem, and create margin 3 rem. After that, let's define the width and height. I'm going to set both of them to 4.5 rem. Also change the background color, make it dark gray using 777, and then change the color, make the icons white. Okay, so I'm going to place the icons in the center of those boxes, and also we will make the boxes circles. In order to center the icons, I'm going to use Flexbox. Let's use display flex, and then justify content center and align item center. As for the making boxes circles, let's use border radius with the value 50%. Okay, so the icons look good, and the last thing that I want to do regarding them is to create a simple hover effect. I'm going to change the background color on hover. So let's go ahead and select eye element with hover and change background color. I'm going to use color C29525. Besides that, we need transition with the values background color and 0.3 seconds. Alright, so with the social media icons we are done. Let's go back to the menu items and create the hover effect. It's going to be a kinda different one. It won't be the simple hover that we used a minute ago. So once we hover over the items, they should change the color from left to right. Let me explain what we are going to do. We will create the before pseudo element for each menu item with the exact same content, but with a different color. For example, the home will have the before pseudo element with the text home, about us will have about us, and so on. They will be placed on the actual menu items, but they will have the width of 0 pixels. Once we hover over the items, then the width of the before pseudo element will increase to 100%, and it will create the color changing effect. Alright, let's write the code and it will become more clear. Let's select the before pseudo elements. The first thing that we have to do is to define the content. As we said, each pseudo element will have the same content. So we can either select the pseudo elements for all menu links separately using the nth child selector, or we can use a little trick. I'm going to assign to all menu links the attribute called data content. And then I will specify the content for each menu link separately. For the first one we need home, then about us, then we need team, pricing, and contact. After that, we just need to assign to the content property a function called attribute, which is expressed as attr, and we need to specify here the attribute name, which is data content. Alright, after that I'm going to define the position. Let's make it absolute. We need position relative for the menu link because it is the parent element, and we need to position the before pseudo element according to the menu link. After that, let's define the top and left properties. We need to make both of them 0 and change the color, make it C29525. Alright, so what we see here is the before pseudo element. Now I'm going to make its width 0 by default and increase it to 100% on hover. Okay, so right now the before pseudo elements are still visible, and also the second item is broken on 2 lines. In order to fix those issues, we need to use overflow hidden, which will hide the before pseudo elements. And in order to avoid wrapping text, we need white space with the value no wrap. Alright, so now we're ready to go. Let's use the hover effect. I'm going to select menu link with hover, followed by the before pseudo element, and we have to make width 100%. Also, I'm going to use transition with the values width 0.3 second, and besides that I'm going to use one of the transition timing functions called isInOut. So as you can see, the hover works perfectly and it creates a really nice and cool effect. Alright, so with the menu items we are done. Next we have to make the hamburger menu work. I'm going to hide the sidebar by default and display it once we click the menu icon. Also, we have to transform the lines into X and display the tooltip once we hover over the X. First of all, I'm going to manage to display and hiding the sidebar, and we will do that using a little bit of JavaScript. So we will create a new class in CSS called change, which will include some styles for the sidebar, and we will add this class name to the container when we click the menu icon. So let's go to the script.js file and at first select the menu icon. I'm going to do that using query selector method. We have to specify here the class name, which is Hamburger Menu. Next, we need to attach to the element event listener using addEventListener method, which will take two arguments. The first one is going to be the type of the event, click. As for the second argument, it's going to be arrow function, which will be executed once we click the element. After that, we need to select the container. Let's use again query selector method and pass here class name container. So again, we have to add the class to the container when we click the icon, and then we have to remove it on the next click. So we need to use a toggle method. At first, I'm going to use here class list property. This property returns all the classes that the element has. Next, we need to attach to it a method called toggle, and we have to specify here the class name change. Alright, so that's it about the JavaScript. Let's go back to CSS. I'm going to hide the sidebar by default. For that, let's change its right position. Right now it equals to 0 and we need here minus 40 rem because the width of the sidebar is equal to 40 rem. After that, we need to select the class change followed by the sidebar, and we have to set the right position to 0. Lastly, let's use transition with the values right and 0.5 second. Okay, so if I click the icon, then the sidebar will display with a smooth transition, and it will close once we click again the icon. Alright, so the sidebar is moving, but the menu icon doesn't change. As you know, we have to transform it into X. But before that, I'm going to make the menu icon move on click. I mean, it should move in the same direction as the sidebar does. For that, again, we need to use a new class, change, followed by the Hamburger Menu. And I'm going to change its right position. Let's make it 33 rem. Also, use transition. We need here right. And the duration, 0.7 seconds. It's going to be slightly higher than the duration of the transition of the sidebar. It will create a nice effect. So, as you can see, the icon is moving with some nice transition. Alright, finally, let's go ahead and transform icon into X. We need to transform the first and third lines. As for the second line, we have to hide it. At first, let's change the background color because the sidebar has a white background and the icon is not quite visible. I'm going to select the line once again because eventually we will add to it the class change. So let's change its background color. I'm going to use here RGBA value with a black color and with the opacity 0.8. Then I'm going to select the lines with the individual class names. Let's select the first line. So once we click the icon, the first line should rotate and also move slightly according to both directions, I mean X and Y axis. So we need here transform. With the rotate function, I'm going to rotate lines with 45 degrees. As for the translate function, I'm going to pass here 0.3 rem and then 0.8 rem. As we said, the second line is going to be hidden, so let's select it and assign to it opacity 0 and visibility hidden. Okay, that's it about the second line. Next we have line 3. I'm going to copy this code from here. Let's change the class name. We need line 3. And also we need minus 45 degrees and minus 0.8 rem. Okay, so as you can see, we have here the X, and in order to make it work, we need to add to all 3 lines the class change. Alright, so the Hamburger menu works perfectly, and actually with the sidebar we are almost done. The only thing that I want to create is the tooltip, which should display once we hover over the X. First of all, I'm going to add a span element in the Hamburger menu. Let's insert here close. As you see right now, it has messed up the lines a little bit. We need to style it, so let's go ahead and select span element. First of all, let's define its position, make it absolute, and then set left property to 5 rem. So the span element is positioned. Let's go ahead and define its width and height. I'm going to set its width to 10 rem. As for the height, let's make it 4 rem, and also change the background color. I'm going to use here color E2B646. Okay, next I'm going to place the text in the center and customize it. Let's use Flexbox. We need display flex and then justify content center, also align item center. Let's change the color of the text and also take care of the font. I'm going to make color white. As for the font family, I'm going to use Bellew DA2 serif. Then change the font size, make it 1.6 rem. And also create some space between the letters using letter spacing with value 0.1 rem. Alright, so the tooltip is almost ready. We need to add to it a little arrow on the left side, and I'm going to create it using a before pseudo element. So let's select span element with the before pseudo element. Let's make the content empty and define position, make it absolute. So right now the before pseudo element is not visible, but we will fix that. I'm going to create its shape with the help of the borders. So we need to define border on all 4 sides. Let's start with the left side. We need border left with the values 1 rem, solid and transparent color. Next, I'm going to use border right with the values 1 rem, solid, and the color E2B646. Next, I'm going to use border bottom. Let's actually grab those values from here and paste them. Then duplicate this line of code and change bottom into top. So now the element is visible, but we need to define its position. Let's make its top position 50%. Then I'm going to define left position. Let's make it -2 rem, and also use transform. Translate y with the value -50%. Alright, so that's it. The tooltip is ready. I'm going to hide it by default, and once we hover over the icon, it should be displayed. So we need here opacity 0 and visibility hidden. Then I'm going to select the icon with the hover. Followed by the span element. Let's make opacity 1 and visibility visible. And also I'm going to use transition with the values all and 0.2 second. Alright, so once we hover over the icon, then the tooltip will display. But actually we have here a tiny problem. If I hover over the icon while the sidebar is hidden, then the tooltip will display anyway. We don't need that. We need to display it once the icon is transformed into an X. And in order to achieve that, we need to use again class change. Alright, so now everything works perfectly, and with the sidebar we are done. It's time to move on to the next section, which is going to be the About Us section. Let's take a look at the finished project and see once again what we're going to build. So this is the About Us section. It consists of a header, which includes the heading and the underline. Then down below we have a couple of paragraphs with headings and some font awesome icons. In the center of this section we can see the image of the house. This section is going to be a kind of simple, but at the same time the interesting one, because we're going to create the layout using CSS grid. Alright, let's go ahead and start to create the HTML markup. I'm going to open the section tag right after the sidebar with the class name About Us. Next I'm going to insert here the header. Actually we will have the same header in other section as well, so I'm going to use here some common class names. Let's say section header. So as we said, the header will consist of a heading and the underline. So I'm going to insert here h1 heading element with the class section heading and with the content About Us. And down below open div tag with the class underline. Alright, next we have to take care of the services. Overall we will have 6 of them. Each service will consist of a heading, font awesome icon, and the paragraph. First of all, I'm going to open a div tag, which is going to be the wrapper of the services. Then open a div tag for the service itself. So we will have 2 main parts in each service. The first one is going to be the service header, which will include the font awesome icon and the heading. Then inside it open I element with the class names FAS, FA, pan, nib. Next I'm going to open H3 heading element with the content interior. And also we need paragraph with the class service text and with some dummy text. Alright, as we said, overall we will have 6 services, so I'm going to duplicate this code 5 times and change the class names of the elements and also the headings. So the second one is going to be FAS, FA, paint, roller. As for the heading, let's make it exterior. Next we will have FAS, FA, pencil, alt, and the heading design. Then the next one is going to be FAS, FA, paint, brush, decoration. Next we will have FAS, FA, ruler combined, and the heading is going to be planning. As for the last service, let's use class FAR, FA building, and the heading execution. Alright, so here we have the services. The only thing that we have to do regarding the HTML markup is to add the image. So I'm going to open div tag, which is going to be the wrapper of the image. Let's assign to it class about us image wrapper. Then open image tag itself. And in the source attribute, let's specify the path of the image. We need house.png from the images folder. Okay, so that's it about the HTML markup. Everything is ready to start to write the CSS. As I said, the layout of most of this section will be created using CSS Grid, so I'm going to switch the project to the Mozilla Firefox for a while, because nowadays Mozilla Firefox has the best developer tools for the CSS Grid module. It will make our working process more convenient and flexible. If you are not familiar with the CSS Grid module, then you can check out our CSS Grid tutorial on YouTube. You can find the link in the description. Alright, let's go ahead and start to write the CSS. First of all, I'm going to select the section element. Let's define its width, make it 100%. Also change background color. I'm going to use light gray color, F5, 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 and also create some space at the bottom using padding bottom with the value 15 rem. Okay, so now I'm going to customize the header. Let's select section header. At first we have to center the elements, and for that I'm going to use Flexbox. So let's make section header flex container. Then we need to change the direction. Let's make it column. And in order to center flex items, we need align items center. Besides that, I'm going to create some space inside of the header using padding. Let's make padding on top 7 rem, then 0 on the right side, 10 rem at the bottom, and 0 on the left side. Alright, so the header is centered, and now I'm going to customize the heading and then the underline. Let's go ahead and start with the heading. Let's select it, and first of all define font family. In this case I'm going to use font called Muli Serif. Then increase font size, make it 5 rem. Also I'm going to make font lighter using font weight 300. Then change the color. I'm going to use color 4B, 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 and create space at the bottom using margin bottom 6 rem. Alright, so the heading looks nice. Let's move on and take care of the underline. Let's select div element, define its width and height. I'm going to set width to 12 rem. As for the height, let's make it 0.3 rem. And also In order to make the underline visible, we have to define background color. Let's use here C29525. Alright, so with the header we are done. Let's move on and take care of these services. As I said, I'm going to align them with CSS grid. So let's go ahead and select the wrapper with the class services. First of all, let's define width and height, make both of them 100%. And then make the services a grid container using display grid. So right now nothing is changed here because we haven't defined rows and columns yet. So overall we will have 16 columns and 6 rows. So we have to define grid template columns. Let's use repeat function and specify here the number of the column 16 and then the size of the column 1 fractional unit. Next we have grid template rows. So we will have 6 rows. Use again repeat function with the argument 6. As for the size, I'm going to use 6 rem. And finally, I'm going to create space between the rows using grid row gap with the value 4 rem. Alright, so as you can see, the elements have changed their positions. It happened automatically, and now we have to define their positions manually and build the layout. Before we do that, I'm going to inspect the page and display the grid layout. On the right hand side of the developer tools we have a layout section where we can find the div element with the class services. So if I check here the little box, then the grid layout will display. You can find here the columns and the rows with proper line numbers. So Mozilla Firefox allows us to display the grid layout like so. Alright, I'm going to decrease the size of the image for a while because I think it's too big right now. So let's go ahead and select image and set its width to 50 rem. After that, let's define the positions for the services separately. In order to select them separately, I'm going to use the nth child selector. So let's start with the first service. Let's select it with nth child selector, and as the number of the service, let's specify 1. So now we have to define grid column line numbers and grid row line numbers. Let's start with grid column. I'm going to place first service between 4 and 7 lines. So let's use here 4/7. As for the grid row, the service is going to be placed between the first and third rows. Let's move on to the second service. I'm going to duplicate this code, change the number of the service and also the number of the grid column and row. So in case of second service, we need grid column line numbers 3 and 6. As for the grid row, it's going to be 3 and 5. Actually, I'm going to define quickly the line numbers for the rest of the services because you already saw the way that I'm going to use to align them. So for the third service, we need grid column 4/7 and grid row 5-1. Next comes fourth service. We need grid column line numbers 11 and 14. As for the grid row, we need 1 and 3. For the fifth service, I'm going to define grid column as 12 and 15. As for the grid row, we need 3 and 5. And for the last item, for the sixth service, we need grid column line numbers 11 and 14. As for the grid row, we need 5-1. Alright, so all 6 services are aligned, but that's not what we want because the image has broken the layout. Let's go ahead and define its position as well. I'm going to define position for wrapper. Let's use grid column and set it to 7 and 11. As for the grid row, I'm going to set it to 2 and 6. Okay, so now we have a much better situation, but we need to add a couple of more styles to the image wrapper and the image itself in order to make the layout perfect. So I'm going to set the width of the image wrapper to 100%. As for the image, let's make its width 100% as well. Also, we need object feed cover in order to maintain the quality of the image. And besides that, I'm going to decrease opacity slightly. Let's make it 0.8. Alright, so now the image is placed perfectly and we are done with it. Let's take care of the services. I want them to take up 100% in their grid cells. So let's select service and make width 100% and also create some space at the bottom using margin bottom 2 rem. After that, let's customize the individual elements in the service. Let's start with the service header, where we have the font awesome icon and the heading. So let's select this element. I'm going to make it flex container using display flex. Also, let's align items in the center and create some space at the bottom using margin bottom 1 rem. Actually, something's wrong here because the header should be placed at the top of the paragraph. Let's check the HTML markup. So as you can see, the paragraph is placed inside the header and that's the mistake. It should be outside of the header. So let's quickly fix that for all of the services. Alright, after that I'm going to style the font awesome icon. So let's go ahead and select this element. First of all, let's increase the font size, make it 4 rem. Then change color. I'm going to use 4B 3 times. And also create some space on the right side of the icon using margin right 2 rem. Alright, so the icons look good, and next comes the heading. So let's go ahead and select this element. First of all, I'm going to define font family. Let's use here Bellew, the A2, serif. Then change the font size, make it 2.6 rem. And also define the line height with the same value, 2.6 rem. Besides that, I'm going to make the font lighter using font weight 400 and create some space at the bottom using margin bottom 2 rem. Alright, so the headings are styled as well, and finally we have to take care of the paragraphs. Let's select service text. At first define font family. In this case I'm going to use Josephine Slab serif. Then define font size, make it 1.6 rem, and also I'm going to use text align property with the value justify. Alright, so the paragraphs look good, and actually we have finished working on the About Us section. Now it's time to move on and start to work on the next section, which is going to be the theme section. First of all, I'm going to remind you what we're going to build. So let's take a look at the finished project. So here we have the theme section. It consists of the header and 3 cards. If I hover over the cards, then some information with a button will appear, and also as you can see we have here a nice and cool hover effect. The card moves according to the cursor's direction. This effect will be created using one of the JavaScript plugins called Tilt.js. Alright, so that's it what we are going to build. As usual, let's start with the HTML markup. I'm going to open a section tag right under the About Us section. Let's assign to it class theme. So overall we will have two parts in the section. The first one is going to be the header. Actually, I'm going to grab the code from the previous section. Let's paste it here and just change the heading. We need here our theme. The second part of this section is going to be the cards wrapper, which will include all three cards. So let's open div tag with the class cards wrapper. Then we need another div, which will be the card itself. So each card will consist of two different parts. The first one is going to be the image. So let's open a div tag which will be the wrapper of the image. I'm going to assign to it class card image wrapper. And then open image tag itself. Let's specify the path of the image. We need image called person1.jpg from the images folder. And also I'm going to assign to the alt attribute the value, let's say CEO. The second part of the card is going to be the card info, where we have some information about the person. So I'm going to pass here h2 heading element, which will include the full name of the person. Then we will have another heading, h3 heading element, which will specify the position of the person. Let's insert here CEO. Then we will have little paragraph with some dummy text. And finally, I'm going to insert here button with the text read more. Alright, so here we have the first card, which right now looks quite ugly because we have here just pure HTML. So overall we will have three cards. So let's duplicate the first card twice and then make some changes. I'm going to change the name of the image. It's going to be person2.jpg. Also change the alt attribute. We need here designer. The full name of the person is going to be N Brown and the position designer. Next we need to change the name of the image. For the third card it's going to be person3.jpg. Also the alt attribute is going to be architect. Then I'm going to change the full name. It's going to be Mary Doe. And finally change the position, write architect. Okay, so the HTML markup is created and everything is ready to start to write the CSS. At first I'm going to customize the entire section and then we'll move on and use the Tilt.js plugin. So let's go ahead and select this section element. I'm going to make it flex container using display flex. Also change the direction. We need here column. And then in order to center flex items horizontally and vertically, let's use justify content center and align items center. And finally I'm going to create some space inside of the section using padding. Let's make padding at the top 0, then 5 rem on the right side, 20 rem at the bottom, and 5 rem on the left side. Alright, next I'm going to take care of the cards wrapper. So let's go ahead and select this element and make it flex container. Next I'm going to create some space between the cards using justify content, space evenly. And lastly, let's create some space at the top of the cards using margin top with value 8 rem. Okay, so as you can see, the cards are placed horizontally in a row. Let's go ahead and customize them. I'm going to select card. Let's define its width and height. I'm going to set width to 37 rem. As for the height, let's make it 45 rem. So right now, as you can see, each of the cards has a different width and height because we have the images too bigger. So we need to define their sizes. Let's select image wrapper and define width and height. I'm going to set both of them to 100%. Then select image itself and define width and height. Let's make both of them 100% and also use object fit cover. As you can see, we don't have here the space between the cards because we have not defined the width for the cards wrapper. So let's assign to it width and set it to 100%. Alright, so now we have a much better result. All the images have the same size. Let's go ahead and use a couple of more styles. I'm going to add shadow using box shadow with the values 0, 1 rem, 4 rem, and then RGBA value with the black color and with opacity 0.4. Next, I'm going to add some styles to the image wrapper and the image itself. So for the wrapper, I'm going to define background color. Let's make it 262626. And also, we need border radius to make the corners rounded. Let's make it 0.5 rem. Next, I'm going to add some styles to the image. I'm going to decrease opacity slightly. Let's make it 0.8. And also we need to use border radius with value 0.5 rem. And besides that, we need border radius for the card as well in order to create perfect border radius for the card. So let's make it 0.5 rem as well. Alright, so now we have to take care of the card info. As you already know, it's going to be placed down below and it should be hidden. And then once we hover over the card, it should display. Right now I'm going to place it on the card, and once we customize it, then we will take care of the hover effect. So let's go ahead and select card info and make its position absolute. Next we need position relative for the card because I'm going to position card info according to the card, which is the parent element. Then define bottom property for the card info and make it 2 rem. And also create some space inside of the element using padding with value 2 rem. Alright, let's go ahead and customize the individual elements in the card info. I'm going to start with a heading. So let's go ahead and select it. Define its font family. I'm going to use font called Bellu DA2 serif. Then change font size, make it 2.5 rem. Also we need to use here line height with the same value, 2.5 rem. Make the font lighter using font weight 300. And also change the color, make it EEE. Alright, so the first heading looks good. I want to add to it a little shadow. Actually, I want the shadow for the rest of the elements as well, so I'm going to assign it to the card info itself. So let's define text shadow with the values 0.2 rem, 0.5 rem, and the RGBA value with black color and with opacity 0.4. Alright, let's move on and customize the second heading. Let's select it. Define font family I'm going to use here Muli serif. Then change font size, make it 2 rem. Also make the font lighter using font weight 500. Change the color of the text. I'm going to use here color A5 2A2A. And finally, let's create some space at the bottom of the element using margin bottom with value 1 rem. Okay, so that's it regarding the second heading. Let's move on to the paragraph. Let's select it and define font family. Let's use here Belu DA2 serif. Next, I'm going to change the font size. Let's make it 1.4 rem. Also, I'm going to define line height. In this case, let's make it 1.6 rem. Change the font weight. Use here 300. Then also I'm going to change the color of the text. Let's make it EEE. After that, I'm going to decrease the width of the paragraph slightly. Let's make it 80%. And also create some space at the bottom using margin bottom 2 rem. Alright, so the paragraph looks good, and the last element that we need to customize here is the button. So let's select it. Define its width and height. I'm going to set width to 10 rem. As for the height, let's make it 3 rem. And also change background color. Let's make it C29525. Okay, let's add a couple of more stars to the button. I'm going to get rid of default border. Let's use border none. Then change font family. Let's use Belu DA2 serif. Next, I'm going to define font size. Let's make it 1.4 rem. And also define line height. Make it 1.5 rem. As for the color, let's make it EEE. Alright, so finally I'm going to make the button slightly rounded and create a little shadow effect. Let's use border radius with value 0.3 rem. And also use box shadow with values 0, 0.1 rem, 0.8 rem, and the RGBA value with black color and with the opacity 0.4. Okay, so the button is customized, and actually we are ready to create the hover effect. At first, let's change the position of the card info and also make it hidden. We need here bottom property to be equal to 0. And also we need opacity 0 and visibility hidden. Then I'm going to select a card with hover, followed by the card info. So once we hover over the card, we have to move up the card info and make it visible. So we need bottom property with value 2 rem, then opacity 0 and visibility visible. And besides that, let's use transition with the values all and 0.3 seconds. Alright, so as you can see, the hover effect works fine. Actually, I want to add here one more thing. Once we hover over the card, I want to make it slightly darker. So let's select card with hover. Then it should be followed by the image. Let's decrease the opacity, make it 0.5. And also use transition with the values opacity and 0.3 seconds. Alright, so as you can see, everything works perfectly, and actually we are ready to use the plugin called Tilt.js. First of all, I'm going to visit its website. Let's search for tilt.js. So here is the website of Tilt.js plugin. You can find here different information, the different usages of the plugin with different options. Also, we have here the instructions how to use this plugin. I'm going to click the link download. We will navigate to the GitHub repository where we can find different files and folders. We need to go to the source folder. You can find here the file. Let's open it. So this is the entire code of this plugin. I'm going to copy it. Let's click the edit button here, select the entire code and copy it. Then go to the VS Code and create a new file called tilt.js and paste here the code. After that, we need to link this file to the HTML document. So let's open script tag and in the source attribute specify the path of the file. Besides that, we have to bring in the jQuery as well. So let's go ahead and search for jQuery CDN. Go to the first link. Actually, you can choose here different jQuery versions. I'm going to click the uncompressed version and grab the link. Let's paste it here. Alright, so that's it regarding the setup of Tilt.js. Let's go back to the website. So as I said, here we have some different effects with the instructions. You can use a parallax effect, glare, keep floating, and so on. In our case, I'm going to use the basic one. So if you wish to use different options, you can find the instructions here. The only thing that we have to do is to assign to all the cards the attribute called data tilt. So let's go ahead and use the multi-cursor and insert for all the cards attribute called data tilt. Alright, so if I hover over the cards, then the effect will work fine. I think it's pretty nice and cool. Okay, so finally we're done with the theme section and we can move on and start to work on the next section. Let's take a look at the finished version of the project. So the next section is going to be the contact section. It has a dark background and the contact form itself is placed in the center of the section. It consists of two parts. On the left side we have an image as the background. As for the right side, you can see here the heading, a couple of input fields and the submit button. Each input field has the label which moves up nicely once we focus on the fields. So that's what we're going to build. Before we start to create the HTML markup, I'm going to fix one little issue. If I click the menu icon and display the sidebar, you will notice that it ends up behind the cards. So to fix that issue, I'm going to use the z-index property with some higher value, let's say 100. Okay, so now the problem is fixed and we can go ahead and start to write the HTML markup for the contact section. Let's open section element with the class contact. Then I'm going to open div tag, which is going to be the wrapper of the contact form. So as we said, the contact form will have two sides, left and right. So let's open div tag, that is going to be the left side. Let's assign to it class contact left. Next we need the right side. So open div tag with the class contact right. So the right side will consist of two main parts. The first one is going to be the heading. As for the second one, it should be the form. So let's open h1 heading element with the class contact heading. And as the content right here, contact. After that, let's open the form element. So the form will include three different input groups and the submit button. Let's open div tag with the class input group. In the first input group, we will have the input element for the full name and the label. So let's open input tag with the type text and with class field. Next we need label. Let's assign to it class input label and also insert here the text full name. Okay, let's duplicate this code. Then change the type from text into email. And also, instead of full name, let's insert here email. Alright, the third input group is going to be kind of different, because instead of the input element, we will have text area. Let's open div tag with the class input group. Then insert in it text area with the class name field. And then after that, I'm going to create label. Let's assign to it class message. And also insert here the content message. Okay, finally, I'm going to create the submit button. Let's do that using input element with type submit. Also, we need here class submit btn. And as the value, let's insert here submit. Alright, so that's it regarding the HTML markup of the contact section. Now we have to start to write some CSS and customize these elements. Let's go ahead and select the section elements. And first of all, define width and height. I'm going to set width to 100%. As for the height, let's make it 100% of the viewport. Use here 100 VH. And then change background color. I'm going to use here color 272727. Alright, next I'm going to place the content in the center, and for that let's use Flexbox. First of all, I'm going to make the section element flex container using display flex. And then in order to center content vertically and also horizontally, use justify content center and align items center. Alright, so the content is centered, and with this section element we are done. Let's move on to the contact wrapper. At first, let's define width and height. I'm going to make its width 60%. As for the height, let's make it 75 rem. Also, I'm going to place the left and right parts side by side using display flex. And then let's use some temporary background color in order to make the contact wrapper visible. Let's use here white color. And finally, I'm going to create a little shadow effect. Let's use box shadow with the values 0, 3 rem, 7 rem, and the RGBA value with the black color and with opacity 0.5. Alright, so that's the way how the contact wrapper looks right now. Let's go ahead and start to customize the left side. Select contact left. At first, let's define its width. I'm going to make it 35%. Then I'm going to set the image as the background. But first of all, let's use linear gradient. Then I'm going to pass here RGBA value. Let's insert here 15 3 times and the opacity 0.6. Then I'm going to use another RGBA value. Let's insert here 22 3 times and the opacity 0.9. After that, let's specify the URL of the image. We need contact bg.jpg from the images folder. Also, let's place here center and no repeat. And finally, we need to define background size as cover. Alright, so that's it about the left side. Let's move on and take care of the right side. Select contact right. it should take up the rest of the width. So let's make width 65%. Change background color. I'm going to use here color EEE. And also define padding. I'm going to make padding at the top 3 rem and then 10 rem on the rest of the sides. Also, let's get rid of the temporary white background from the contact wrapper. Alright, so now I'm going to customize the individual elements on the right side. Let's go ahead and start with the heading. At first, let's define its font family. I'm going to use here Baloo, DA2, Serif. Then increase font size, make it 6 rem. Also make the font lighter using font weight 300. Change the color, make it 27, 27, 27. Then I'm going to create some space at the bottom using margin bottom 5 rem. And finally, let's place it in the center using text align center. Okay, so the heading is styled, it looks good, and I'm going to move on to the form elements. So let's go ahead and select it. First of all, let's define its width, make it 100%. Let's make the form flex container using display flex. Then change the direction, make it column, and align items in the center using align item center. Alright, so that's it about the form element. Next I'm going to customize the input fields. I mean the inputs and the text area. They have the common class field, so let's go ahead and select it. Let's define width, make it 45 rem. Then make the background color transparent. Also get rid of default border. And then define border bottom with values 0.2 rem. I'm going to set the style of the border to dashed. And then define the color 6.3, 6.3 and 6.3. Okay, let's add a couple of more styles to the fields. I'm going to create some space at the top and bottom using margin. Let's make it 3 rem and 0. Besides that, I'm going to use padding. Let's set padding to 1 rem at the top, on the right side, at the bottom. As for the left side, let's make it 0. Next, I'm going to define font family. In this case, let's use font called Muli Serif. Then define font size, make it 1.6 rem. And change the color, use here 4B 3 times. Alright, so the input fields look quite good. Now I'm going to define the height for the inputs and the text area separately. So at first let's select inputs and set height to 4 rem. Then select the text area. So in case of the text area, I'm going to define the max height and max width, because as you know, we can change the size of the field manually and it would break the layout. So we need to disable this option. Let's set max height to 7 rem. As for the max width, let's make it 45 rem. Alright, that's it about the inputs and text area. Next we need to take care of the labels. They should be placed inside the input fields by default. So let's select label and define its position. I'm going to make it absolute. Then we need position relative for the input group, because it is the parent element. Then define left property as 0. As for the bottom position, we will define it separately for the inputs and the text area. So at first let's define here font family, make it Palu DA2 serif. Then increase font size, make it 1.8 rem. Change the color. I'm going to use here color 4B, and then transform text into uppercase. As you know, labels should place inside the input elements, and we won't be able to focus on the inputs. Therefore, I'm going to use here pointer events none. Alright, let's select the labels of the inputs and the text area separately and define the bottom position. I'm going to start with the input label. Let's make bottom position 3 rem. As for the text area, I mean the label of the text area, which has class message, let's make bottom position 6 rem. Alright, so everything is ready to create the focus effects. I'm going to do two different things. When I focus on the input fields, I want to transform the dashed border into a solid one and also move the label up and make it slightly smaller. So I'm going to select the field with the focus pseudo class and define border bottom style, make it solid. So once I focus on the input fields, then the border will change and it will transform into solid. Okay, next let's move on to the label. I'm going to select field with the focus. Now we have to select the label, and in this case we need to use one of the CSS combinators called general sibling selector that is expressed by the tilde sign. So I'm going to move the label using transform translate function. So we need translate y. Let's insert here the value -3 rem. Also, I'm going to decrease the font size of the label. Let's make it 1.2 rem. And finally, use transition with the values all and 0.3 seconds. So if I click again and focus on the input fields, then the labels will move nicely. Alright, so we're almost done with the contact section. The last thing that we have to do is to style the submit button. So let's go ahead and select these elements. First of all, define width and height. I'm going to set width to 45 rem. As for the height, let's make it 5 rem. Then change background color. Let's use here color C29525. Then change the color of the text, make it white. Get rid of default border using border none. And create some space at the top using margin top 2 rem. Okay, so the button looks much better, but we have to add to it some more styles. Let's define font family. I'm going to use here font called Muli Serif. Then change font size, make it 2 rem. Also make the font lighter using font weight 300. Transform text into uppercase. After that, I'm going to create some space between the letters using letter spacing with the value 0.2 rem. Then make the cursor pointer. And finally, I'm going to create some shadow effects for the text and for the button itself. So let's use text shadow with the values 0.1 rem, 0.3 rem, and the RGBA value with the black color and with the opacity 0.5. Then I'm going to duplicate this line of code, change text into box, and also make the opacity 0.3. Alright, so that's it. The contact section is ready, and actually we can move on to the next part of our project, which is the footer. So the footer will be a kind of simple one. We have here just the copyright text and a couple of social media icons. Once we build the footer, then we will create that fixed scrolling button, which will allow us to scroll up to the top of the page. Alright, let's go ahead and start to create the HTML markup. I'm going to open footer tag with the class footer. Next, I'm going to open the div tag, which will wrap the content of the footer. So let's assign to it class footer content. So inside the div element, we will have two parts. The first one is going to be the paragraph with some copyright text. So let's open p element with the class copyright. And then insert here some text, copyright, followed by the copyright sign, which should be expressed by the HTML5 entity. We need to write here ampersand, copy, semicolon, then 2020, code and create, all rights reserved. As for the second part, it's going to be the list of the social media icons. Let's open div tag with the class social list and pass here a couple of link elements with the font awesome icons. The first one is going to be Facebook, so let's use here class names fab, fa-facebook-f. Let's duplicate this line of code twice and change the class names. For the second one, we need FAB, FA, Instagram. As for the third one, it's going to be Twitter. Alright, so the HTML markup is ready for the footer. Let's go ahead and customize it quickly. Let's select footer and define its width and height. I'm going to set width to 100%. As for the height, let's make it 15 rem. Then change background color. I'm going to use here color 17181B. Next, I'm going to place the content of the footer in the center, and for that, let's use Flexbox. We need display flex. Then justify content center and align items center. Alright. Let's move on and customize the footer content. Let's select this element and define width. I'm going to make it 60%. Then make the footer content flex container using display flex. And then create space between the flex items, the paragraph and the social media icons using justify content space between. Okay, so the elements are aligned in the right way. Let's go ahead and style them. I'm going to start with the paragraph. Let's select it, and first of all define the font family. I'm going to use here Belu DA2 serif. Then define font size, make it 1.6 rem. As for the color, I'm going to make it A7, A7, A7. Okay, so as you can see, the paragraph is styled. Let's move on to the social media icons. I'm going to select the link element. Let's define margin. I'm going to set it to 0 at the top and the bottom. As for the left and right sides, let's make it 2 rem. Then select I elements. Increase the font size, make it 2 rem. And change the color. Use here color A7 3 times. Alright, so with the footer we are done. It is customized, and now we have to take care of the scrolling button. At first, let's create the button in the index.html file. Actually, the button will be represented as the link. So let's assign to it class scrollbtn. Then insert here I elements with the classes FAS, FA arrow up. Alright, let's go ahead and style the button. Select it. It should have fixed position. Then define right and bottom properties. I'm going to make both of them 5 rem. Then set width and height. I'm going to set both of them to 4.5 rem. And also define background color. Let's use here color E2B646. Alright, so here we have the button, and now we need to style the font awesome icon. It should be placed in the center of the box. Let's use Flexbox. We need here justify content center and also align items center. Then increase font size, make it 2 rem. Change the color, make it white. Also, I'm going to create a little shadow effect using box shadow with the values 0, 0.1 rem, 0.6 rem, and the RGBA with the black color and with the opacity 0.2. And finally, use border radius with value 0.3 rem. Alright, so the button is ready. We just need to make it work. For that, I'm going to use a couple of lines of JavaScript. So once we click the button, we will assign to the HTML element property called scroll behavior, and we will set it to smooth. And then after a second, we will remove it, because if we don't do that, then the smooth scroll will work if we click any of the links on the page. So let's go ahead and first of all select the scroll button with the query selector method. Then attach to it event listener. I'm going to pass here click event and the arrow function. So next we need to select the HTML element. Let's use again query selector method. Then use style and the property called scroll behavior. As we said, we have to set it to smooth. After that, in order to remove the property from the HTML element, after 1 second, I'm going to use a method called setTimeout, which will take one argument. It's going to be the callback function, and it's going to be executed after 1 second once we click the button. Let's grab this line of code from here, paste it, and instead of smooth, let's use unset. And also we need here second argument, 1000, which is 1000 milliseconds. Okay, so if I click the button, then we will navigate to the top of the page smoothly. Alright, so that's it. We have built all the sections of our project, and now it's time to make it responsive to different screen sizes. Let's go ahead and inspect the page, then switch to the responsive mode. Actually, I have already prepared different breakpoints where we have to make some changes, so we won't waste time on that. The first breakpoint on which we need to make some changes is going to be 1500 pixels. So let's go ahead and create Css Media Query and specify max width as 1500 pixels. So on the breakpoint, I'm going to change slightly the position of the image in the About Us section. Let's go ahead and select the wrapper of the image and set its grid row line numbers as 3 and -1. Next, I'm going to decrease slightly the width of the card. So let's select it and make the width 34 rem. After that, I'm going to take care of the contact wrapper. I'm going to increase its width and decrease the height. So let's select contact wrapper, set its width to 80%. As for the height, I'm going to make it 65 rem. Alright, so the last thing that I'm going to do is to increase the width of the footer content. So let's go ahead and select this element and set its width to 80%. Okay, so that's it. We don't need any other changes on 1500 pixels. Let's go ahead and work on the next breakpoint, which is going to be 1400 pixels. So I'm going to create a new CSS Media Query with a max width 1400 pixels. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is to customize the banner elements, I mean the heading, paragraph, and the button. So let's go ahead and start with the heading. I'm going to change the font size. Let's make it 6 rem. Then decrease the line height. Make it 7 rem. Next, I'm going to select banner, paragraph. Let's decrease its font size, make it 3 rem. And also select button. Let's decrease its width, make it 20 rem. Then change height. I'm going to set it to 5 rem. As for the font size, let's make it 1.6 rem. Alright, so the header looks good. Let's check the sidebar. As you can see, we need to decrease the font size of the menu items slightly. So let's go ahead and select menu link and make its font size 3 rem. Alright, after that, let's take care of the About Us section. I'm going to change slightly the layout of the services. So let's go ahead and grab the code from here. Paste it and change the grid column line numbers. Actually, we need to get rid of grid row from every service. And then change the grid column line numbers. So for the first service we need 3, 7. Then it's going to be 2, 6. For the third item we need 3, 7. Then for the next one it's going to be 11, 15. Then 12, 16. And again 11, 15. Alright, so the About Us section looks good, and actually we don't need any other changes on the breakpoint. So let's move on to the next one, which is going to be 1300 pixels. So let's go ahead and create a new CSS Media Query with a max width 1300 pixels. So we have to take care of the theme and contact section on that breakpoint. All other sections look good. Let's start with the theme section. Let's select it and decrease the padding at the bottom. Let's make it 5 rem. Then select cart wrapper. So on the breakpoint I'm going to change the direction. Let's make it column. Also, in order to place cards in the center, use align item center and change margin at the top. Let's make it 4 rem. Okay, so next we need to create some space between the cards. Let's select it and define margin bottom with value 8 rem. Okay, so after that, let's take care of the contact section. Let's select contact wrapper. I'm going to increase its width. Let's make it 90%. And also decrease the height I'm going to set it to 55 RAM. After that, let's select contact heading and change the space at the bottom. Let's set margin bottom to 2 RAM. Next, I'm going to select field, inputs and the text area, and change margin. Let's make it 2 RAM at the top and bottom and 0 on the left and right sides. Alright, so as you can see, with 1300 pixels we are done. Let's move on to the next breakpoint, which is going to be 1000 pixels. So let's go ahead and create a new media. Specify here the max width as 1000 pixels. So at first I'm going to customize the banner. Let's select heading element. Change the font size, make it 5 RAM. Then decrease line height, make it 6 RAM. After that, I'm going to select paragraph. Let's decrease its font size, make it 2.5 RAM. After that, we need button. I'm going to decrease its size. Let's make its width 18 RAM. Then set its height to 4 RAM. And also change the font size, make it 1.5 RAM. Alright, so the banner looks good. Let's move on to the About Us section. So under the breakpoint, we no longer need the grid layout. I'm going to use Flexbox. I will place all the services and the image vertically in a column. So let's go ahead and select services and make it flex container. Then change the direction, make it a column. And also use align item center. Alright, as you can see, we have to decrease the width of the services. So let's select service, make its width 40 RAM, and also define margin bottom as 6 RAM. Okay, next we have to take care of the image because right now it's too bigger. So at first let's select the wrapper and set width to 40 RAM. Next we need to select the image itself and we need to set its width to 100%. Alright, so with the About Us section we are done. It looks good. Also, we don't need to do anything with the Team section. So let's move on and customize the Contact section. Actually, I'm going to hide the left side at all. So let's select Contact Left and set its width to 0. As for the Contact Right, we need to make its width 100%. Alright, let's take care of the inputs and the text area. I'm going to select field. Let's make the width 55 RAM. Then I'm going to select text area because we need to define max width for the text area. Let's set it to 55 RAM. And also change the width of the submit button. Let's make it 55 RAM as well. Alright, so that's it about the contact section. Let's move on and customize the footer. I'm going to place the paragraph and the social media icons vertically in a column. So let's select footer content and change the direction, make it column. Next we need align items center. Also text align center. And I'm going to set width to 50%. After that, let's select paragraph, because I want to change the places for the paragraph and the social media icons. I want to place icons at the top, so let's change the order of the paragraph, make it 1, and also define margin top as 3 rand. Alright, so that's it about the footer, and we have finished working on 1000 pixels. Let's move on and create the next breakpoint. It's going to be 700 pixels. So let's create new media and specify the max width. Make it 700 pixels. Actually, we don't have to do much on that breakpoint. We just need to customize several elements. So let's select heading of the banner. I'm going to change its size. Let's make its font size 4 rand and the line height 5 rand. Next, select paragraph and set its font size to 2 rand. Alright, next let's take care of the contact section. I'm going to select field. Let's make the width 35 rand. Also select text area, because again we need to define its max width. Let's make it 35 rand and then change the width of the submit button. I'm going to set it to 35 rand as well. Alright, so that's it regarding that breakpoint. And finally, we have to customize the project on the last breakpoint, that is going to be 500 pixels. So let's create a new media and specify the max width as 500 pixels. At first, I'm going to decrease the font size of the HTML because it will reflect on all of the element sizes. So let's make its font size 45%. Next, let's take care of the sidebar. I want to expand it to the entire page. So let's make its width 100%. Actually, we have here a tiny issue because once the sidebar is closed, it is still visible. So we need to define its right position and make it -100%. So now the problem is fixed. Next, I'm going to change the position of the menu icon because it's too far from the edge. So we need to select Hamburger Menu, but with the change class. Let's set right position to 38 rand. Alright, so next let's decrease the width of the services. Select service and set its width to 30 rand. The last thing that I'm going to do is to increase slightly the height of the footer. Let's make it 18 rand. Alright, so finally we are done. We made the project responsive to all different screen sizes. If you check it, you will find that it looks good on all different screen sizes. Okay, so we're almost done with our project. The last thing that I'm going to do is to create the spinner which appears before loading the project. So let's go ahead and start to create the HTML markup. But at first I'm going to hide the entire container. So let's go ahead and select container and assign to it display none. So the container is hidden, but actually we see here the scroll button. I suppose that I placed it outside of the container, so let's go ahead and insert it inside of it. Okay, so we are ready to create the HTML markup for the spinner. I'm going to create it outside of the container. Let's open div element, which is going to be the spinner container. Next we need div element with the class circles, in which I'm going to place 8 empty div elements. Okay, right now we see here just a blank page because the div elements are empty and they don't have any styles. Let's go ahead and start to write some CSS. I'm going to select the spinner container. Let's make its position absolute. Then set top and left properties, both of them to 0. Also, I'm going to define width and height. Let's make width 100%. As for the height, I'm going to make it 100% of the viewport. After that, I'm going to change the background color. Let's make it dark using 262626. And also I'm going to place the content in the center, and for that let's use Flexbox. We need here justify content center and align item center. Alright, so what we see here is just the dark background. Now it's time to create the circles and then we'll make them work. The circles will be represented as the after pseudo elements of the div elements. At first, let's select our wrapper circles and define its width and height. Make them 8 rem and also change the background color. I'm going to use here some temporary background. Let's make it white. Okay, so now I'm going to create the circles. Let's select div element with the after pseudo element. And first of all, let's define the content. I'm going to make it empty. Then change the position. Make it absolute. And also I'm going to assign to the circles position relative, because I want to position after pseudo elements according to the circles. Next, I'm going to define width and height. Let's make both of them 0.7 rem. Then, in order to change the shape of the element and make it circle, use border radius with the value 50%. And change the background color. Make it C29525. Alright, so now you can see the circles. Actually, they are placed on top of each other because they all have the position set to absolute. Let's go ahead and define their positions manually. I'm going to select the first pseudo element using nth child selector. Let's set top to 6.3 rem. As for the left, I'm going to make it 6.3 rem as well. Let's move on and position the second circle. I'm going to duplicate this code. We need here nth child 2. I'm going to make top position 6.8 rem. As for the left, it's going to be 5.6 rem. Alright, let's go ahead and define quickly the positions for the rest of the circles. So for the third element, we need top position to be 7.1 rem. As for the left position, it's going to be 4.8 rem. Then for the next element, I'm going to set top to 7.2 rem. As for the left, it's going to be 4 rem. Then for the fifth item, the top position is going to be 7.1 rem. As for the left position, it's going to be 3.2 rem. Next comes sixth item. Let's make its top position 6.8 rem. As for the left, it's going to be 2.4 rem. Then for the seventh element, let's make top position 6.3 rem. And the left 1.7 rem. And for the last item, I'm going to set top position to 5.6 rem and the left position to 1.2 rem. Alright, so these are the starting positions for the circles. Actually, we no longer need that white background, so I'm going to get rid of it. Okay, so now we have to create the CSS keyframes. In the keyframes, we need to define just one CSS rule. The circles should rotate by 360 degrees. So let's create keyframes. I'm going to name it circles. So on 0%, I mean on starting point, we need transform rotate to be 0. As for the 100%, I'm going to make transform rotate 360 degrees. Okay, so the keyframes are ready. Let's select the div elements and assign to it the animation property in order to make those CSS styles work. So we need the name of the animation, which is circles, followed by the duration, 1.2 seconds. Now, as the animation timing function, I'm going to use cubic bezier, which allows us to create the custom animation effects. Actually, you can visit the cubic bezier website, where you can define the different animation effects manually. And once you define the one, you can grab the values from here. Alright, in our case, I'm going to use cubic bezier with the following values. Let's insert here 0.5, 0, 0.5, and then 1. And also I'm going to use here another value called infinite, which will allow us to run the animation infinitely. Okay, so as you can see, the circles are moving, but of course it's not what we want. The next thing that I'm going to do is to define the origin of the transformation. When we use the transform property, then by default the element is moving according to the center. So by default the origin of the transformation is set to center. You can define the origin like left or right, or you can even define origins for the x-axis and y-axis separately. In order to get more information about the transform origin property, you can search for mtn transform origin and check out this page. So here we have a couple of examples that show how the transform origin property works. In our case, I'm going to use the third approach where we define the origin of the x-axis and y-axis separately. So I'm going to use transform origin with the following values. Let's insert here 4 rem and then again 4 rem. Now, as you can see, we have a much better result, but not the perfect one. We need to change the alignment of the circle slightly, and for that I'm going to use margin. Let's set margin to -4 rem at the top, then 0 on the right side, 0 at the bottom, and -4 rem on the left side. Okay, so now the circles are moving quite nicely, but again, that's not what we want. I'm going to add some effects to the animation using animation delay property. I will add to the div elements different delay times separately. Those values are going to be negative, and when we use the negative values with the animation delay property, then the animation starts as if it had already been playing for some amount of time. For example, if the animation should run during, let's say, 5 seconds, and you define the animation delay property as -2 seconds, then the animation will start right from the 3rd second. It will omit the first 2 seconds. Alright, so let's select the div elements separately and define the animation delay property for all of them. I'm going to start with the first div. Let's use nth child selector and set animation delay property to -0.036 seconds. So if you take a closer look at the circles, you will notice that the first one is moving in a kind of different way. Let's go ahead and define the animation delay for the rest of the circles as well. Let's copy this code, paste it here. So for the second div element, I'm going to set animation delay to minus 0.072 seconds. Then for the third div, we need minus 0.108 seconds. Then for the next one, I'm going to set animation delay to minus 144 seconds. Then for the fifth item, let's set it to minus 0.18 seconds. The next one is going to be minus 0.216 seconds. For the seventh item, let's use minus 0.252 seconds. And for the last one, for the eighth item, let's set animation delay to minus 0.288 seconds. Okay, so now the spinner is working perfectly and it creates a really nice and cool effect. Alright, so we're almost done. The only thing that we have to do is to display the container back after a couple of seconds. So I'm going to use a similar technique that we used previously with the change class name. We will add a new class to the body element using JavaScript. Let's open the script.js file. So once the page is loaded, the spinner will be moving for 4 seconds and then the container should display. So once the page is loaded, then after 4 seconds we have to add to body a new class, let's say display. In CSS we will manage to display the container using that new class. So we need the global window object and we have to attach to it onLoad event handler. It should be equal to an arrow function. So this function will be executed once the page is loaded. So in order to execute the function after some delay, we can use a method called setTimeout. Let's pass here the callback function. Then select body element using query selector method. As we said, we need to add to it new class name. So we need here class list property, then add method, and we have to specify here the class, let's say display. The setTimeout method takes the second argument, which is the duration. In this case, we need 4000 milliseconds. Alright, so now we need to select a class display with the spinner container and also the container. So let's start with the spinner container. We need to hide it, so therefore we need here opacity 0 and visibility hidden. Also I'm going to use transition with the values all and 1 second. And besides that, in order to make the transition work, I'm going to use the index property with the higher value, let's say 300. After that, we need to select again display class followed by the container. Right now it has display property set to none and we need to make display block. Okay, so now if I reload the page, then the spinner will be displayed for 4 seconds and then the container will appear. Alright, in order to make those effects perfect, I'm going to create a little animation for the circles. I want to display and hide the circles with some fade effects. At first, let's hide the circles by default. Let's use here opacity 0 and visibility hidden. Then I'm going to create new CSS keyframes. Let's call it display circles. So we will have here a couple of steps. From 0% to 25%, I'm going to use opacity 0 and visibility hidden. So the circles will be hidden during 1 second. Then from 25% to 90%, the circles will be displaying. So we need opacity 1 and visibility visible. And then from 90% to 100%, the circles will start to hide. So we need here opacity 1 and visibility visible. And then on 100%, we need opacity 0 and visibility hidden. Alright, so the keyframes are ready. Let's assign to the circles the animation property. Let's specify the name, display circles, and the duration 4 seconds. So now, as you can see, we have here a much better effect. Alright, so finally we have finished working on the project. Congratulations! I hope it was interesting and helpful because we have used lots of different techniques and stuff. If you enjoyed the video, then please thumbs up, comment below, share it, subscribe to our channel and click the bell to get notified on coming tutorials. Okay, see you next time.